An orphaned musician helped an injured stranger, unknowingly saving the life of his long-lost twin. This single act of kindness would shatter the walls Elias Mercer had built around his heart and rewrite a story that began 32 years ago with a desperate mother's impossible choice. The rain fell in sheets across Boston's empty streets, drumming against Elias's umbrella as he trudged home from another late-night gig. His saxophone case bumped rhythmically against his leg, the familiar weight of comfort in a life largely devoid of constants. At 32, he had mastered the art of existing rather than living, playing his soul out through polished brass for strangers who rarely truly listened, returning to an apartment that never quite felt like home. Tonight's performance at the Blue Note had been particularly draining. The anniversary always took something extra from him. 17 years since Miriam Mercer, the only mother he'd ever known, had passed away, taking with her the last fragments of warmth in his life. His adoptive mother had been his anchor, the woman who chose him when he was nothing but a sickly 5-month-old with no history except a handwritten note pinned to his blanket. His name is Elias. Please love him when I cannot. Thunder cracked overhead as Elias cut through Harrison Avenue, his fingers cold and stiff despite the late April weather. It was then he noticed the huddled shape in the recessed doorway of the abandoned textile factory. A man slumped against the brick wall, seemingly unconscious, blood running a thin scarlet line down his temple. Something about the scene stopped Elias in his tracks. Perhaps it was the way the stranger's hand curled protectively around a worn leather case, not unlike his own instrument case. Or perhaps it was simply that on this night of all nights, Elias recognized something in the man's isolation that echoed his own. "Hey," Elias called, approaching cautiously. "You all right?" No response. The rain intensified, plastering Elias's dark curls to his forehead as he crouched down, abandoning his umbrella to check the man's pulse. Strong but erratic. Up close, the stranger's face was pale, his breathing shallow. The wound at his temple wasn't life-threatening, but the man's skin burned with fever. "I'm going to help you," Elias said, not entirely sure why he felt so compelled to get involved. The city was full of troubled souls. He normally kept his head down, moved forward, survived. But not tonight. With considerable effort, Elias managed to get the stranger to his feet. The man was approximately his height and build, though perhaps a bit thinner. His face, partly obscured by several days' worth of stubble and rain-soaked hair, registered a moment of confused consciousness. "My violin," the stranger murmured, his eyes a striking blue that caught Elias off guard. Fluttering open briefly. "I've got it," Elias assured him, awkwardly balancing both instrument cases while supporting the man's weight. "Let's get you somewhere dry." His apartment was only 3 blocks away. Every step was a struggle against the rain and the increasingly dead weight of the man who drifted in and out of consciousness. By the time Elias managed to unlock his door, his shoulders ached and his clothes were soaked through. But something drove him forward, a peculiar sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. The stranger collapsed onto Elias's couch, shivering violently despite the fever that Elias could feel radiating through his sodden clothes. Making a quick decision, Elias stripped away the man's wet jacket and shoes, covering him with the thickest blanket he owned before calling the only person he knew who might offer medical advice without immediately insisting on an ambulance. "Jazz hands calling at midnight. Must be serious," answered Layla, his neighbor from 2 floors down and an overworked emergency room nurse. Their friendship was one of convenience. She appreciated the occasional free tickets to his performances. He appreciated having someone in the building who nodded hello. "I found a man collapsed on Harrison," Elias explained, keeping his voice low. "High fever, head wound, semi-conscious. And you brought him to your apartment instead of the ER because..." The disapproval in her voice was clear. Elias glanced at the stranger, at the violin case now carefully placed on his coffee table beside his own saxophone. "He's a musician." The silence on the other end of the line spoke volumes. "I know how it sounds," Elias added quickly. "But can you just come take a look? If you say hospital, we'll go." 15 minutes later, Layla was examining the stranger with practiced efficiency. "The head wound is superficial," she determined, cleaning and dressing it with supplies from her ever-present medical bag. "But he's got a nasty case of pneumonia brewing. That's what's causing the fever." The stranger stirred under her touch, his eyes opening fully for the first time. Those eyes, the same striking blue that had momentarily flashed earlier, now fixed on Elias with an intensity that sent an inexplicable shiver down his spine. "Where am I?" the man asked, his voice hoarse. "My apartment," Elias replied. "Found you passed out in the rain." The man tried to sit up but fell back weakly. I need to go. The audition? You're not going anywhere tonight. Layla interjected firmly. Except maybe the hospital. No hospitals, the stranger said with sudden clarity. Please. No insurance. Can't afford. A violent coughing fit interrupted him. Layla sighed heavily, looking between the two men. I can get some antibiotics, but he needs rest, fluids, and someone to monitor that fever. Elias, you're either taking him to the ER or you're on nursing duty. The logical choice was clear. Elias had a gig tomorrow night and a lesson to teach in the afternoon. He barely knew how to take care of himself, let alone a sick stranger. Yet when he opened his mouth, what came out was, I'll watch him. After Layla left, promising to return with antibiotics in the morning, Elias sat in the armchair opposite the couch, studying the man who had so unexpectedly invaded his carefully controlled existence. In sleep, the stranger's features relaxed, and there was something oddly familiar about the arch of his brow, the shape of his jaw. Elias attributed the sensation to exhaustion. He retrieved a bowl of cool water and a cloth, carefully placing it on the man's forehead, the way Miriam had done for him during childhood fevers. The simple act of care awakened something long dormant within him, a memory of being tended to, of mattering to someone. Thank you, the stranger murmured without opening his eyes, his fingers briefly catching Elias's wrist in a weak grip. What's your name? Elias asked softly. Ethan, came the reply before he drifted back to sleep. Ethan Cole. Elias stayed awake most of the night, periodically refreshing the cool cloth and checking the stranger's, Ethan's, fever. In the quiet hours, he found himself studying the violin case. Unlike his own well-maintained saxophone case, this one was battered, held together in places with duct tape. The embossed initials on the handle were nearly worn away. E.M., just like his own initials, Elias Mercer. A coincidence, nothing more. Dawn brought gray light filtering through the blinds and the sound of Ethan's labored breathing. The fever had worsened overnight. When Layla arrived with antibiotics, her expression grew concerned. This is why I said hospital, she chided, administering the first dose. If his fever doesn't break by tonight, you're taking him in. Musician solidarity be damned. Elias nodded, accepting the medications and instructions with uncharacteristic attention to detail. After Layla left for her shift, he canceled his afternoon student with a brief text message. The decision should have filled him with anxiety. He needed every dollar from teaching, but instead he felt oddly at peace. Throughout the day, Ethan drifted between consciousness and feverish dreams. In his more lucid moments, Elias learned fragments of his story. Ethan was a classical violinist, trained at Juilliard but fallen on hard times. He'd come to Boston for an audition with the symphony, a last-ditch effort to salvage his career after personal struggles had derailed him. I was mugged, Ethan explained weakly. They took my wallet, phone, would have taken the violin too, but I fought for it. Stupid, really. Not stupid, Elias replied, understanding implicitly. His own saxophone had been the one constant in a life of impermanence. As evening approached, Ethan's fever finally began to subside. Elias should have been preparing for his gig at the Blue Note, but he called the manager and claimed illness for the first time in 7 years of reliable performances. You'll miss your show, Ethan observed, more alert now as he sipped the broth Elias had warmed. There'll be other gigs, Elias said, surprised to find he meant it. In the quiet of the apartment, with the rain still pattering against the windows, a strange comfort settled between them. Two musicians, two strangers. Yet Elias couldn't shake the feeling that he knew Ethan somehow. Perhaps it was simply recognition of a kindred spirit, someone else who lived through their instrument, who understood the particular loneliness of pouring yourself into music that dissipated into the air as soon as it was created. Do you have family in Boston? Elias asked, carefully casual as he cleared away the empty mug. Ethan's laugh held no humor. I don't have family anywhere. Grew up in the system, aged out, made my own way. The words struck Elias with unexpected force. Me too, he admitted. Well, I was adopted at 5 months, but my adoptive mother died when I was 15. Been on my own since. Something flickered across Ethan's face, a shadow of recognition, quickly masked. That's rough. I got shuffled around a lot. Never stuck anywhere long enough to call it home. Later that night, after Ethan had fallen into a more restful sleep, Elias found himself drawn to the violin case. The urge to open it was inexplicable but overwhelming. With careful hands, he unlatched the case, expecting to find a valuable instrument inside. Instead, nestled alongside a well-used but obviously cherished violin was a faded photograph and a folded piece of paper. The photograph showed a young woman holding twin infants. Her exhausted smile was directed at the camera, her dark curls, so like Elias's own, framing her face. The paper, when Elias unfolded it with trembling fingers, contained handwritten words that mirrored almost exactly the note that had accompanied him to his adoption. His name is Ethan. Please love him when I cannot. The room seemed to tilt beneath Elias's feet. He stared at the photograph, at the date scrawled on the back, his own birthday, and felt the foundations of his identity crack. I always wondered if the other baby was my brother. Ethan's voice came softly from the couch. He had woken silently, observing Elias's discovery with eyes that now seemed unmistakably familiar. The foster parents who took me in first told me I'd come with that picture. They didn't keep me, but they let me keep that. Elias sank into the armchair, the photograph clutched in his hand. I never knew, he whispered. Miriam, my mother, she never said anything about a twin. Maybe she didn't know, Ethan suggested. Or maybe she couldn't take both of us. The possibility hung in the air between them, that 32 years ago, a desperate mother had been forced to separate her sons. That all their lives, they had been moving in parallel, unknown to each other, both seeking expression through music, both haunted by a sense of incompleteness they couldn't name. When's your birthday? Elias asked, though he already knew the answer. September 18th, the same as his. Outside, the rain finally stopped. A strange silence filled the apartment, broken only by the sound of their synchronized breathing. Play something, Elias said suddenly, nodding toward the violin. If you feel up to it. Ethan hesitated, then slowly rose from the couch. He moved with the caution of the recently ill, but his hands were steady as he lifted the violin from its case. No tuning was necessary. Like most serious musicians, he kept his instrument in perfect condition, despite the battered case. The first notes of Bach's chaconne filled the small apartment. Elias closed his eyes, letting the music wash over him. Ethan played with technical brilliance, but it was the emotion behind each note that resonated in Elias's chest like a physical touch. There was longing in those strings, a searching quality that Elias recognized from his own playing. When the piece ended, Elias opened his eyes to find Ethan watching him intently. Your turn, Ethan said quietly. Without a word, Elias assembled his saxophone. He'd never been one for classical pieces, preferring the improvisational freedom of jazz. But tonight he played Gershwin's Summertime, letting the notes speak of loss and hope and the strange, newfound possibility that he might not be as alone in the world as he'd always believed. When the last note faded, the silence between them had transformed into something tangible, a bridge across 32 years of separation. You know what this means, don't you? Ethan said finally, his voice unsteady. That we have the worst luck in the world? Elias attempted humor, but his own voice betrayed him, cracking on the last word. Finding each other like this? Or the best, Ethan countered. What are the odds? The mathematical probability was astronomical. That Elias would walk down that particular street at that exact moment, that he would stop rather than continue home, that Ethan would have traveled to Boston for an audition after years of playing in New York, that both would become musicians despite their separate upbringings. There's a way to know for sure. Layla told them the next morning when she came to check on Ethan. DNA test. Simple enough, but both men knew they didn't need scientific confirmation. The evidence was written in their identical blue eyes, in the shape of their hands on their respective instruments, in the way they both tilted their heads slightly when listening intently. Biology had revealed itself in 1,000 tiny mirrors. In the days that followed, as Ethan regained his strength, they pieced together their separate histories. Elias had been the fortunate one, adopted by Miriam Mercer, a middle school music teacher who had nurtured both his emotional and musical development. Ethan's path had been rockier, bouncing through foster homes until finding temporary stability with a family who recognized his musical talent and supported his application to a specialized arts high school. I always felt like something was missing, Ethan admitted one evening as they shared dinner at Elias's small kitchen table. Even when things were good, there was this emptiness I couldn't explain. Elias nodded, remembering the persistent hollowness that even music couldn't completely fill. I used to dream about a boy who looked like me. Miriam thought it was just my way of coping with being adopted. The symphony audition had passed during Ethan's illness, but he seemed remarkably unconcerned. There'll be other opportunities, he said, echoing Elias's earlier sentiment. What remained unspoken was the question of what came next. Ethan had no home to return to, having sublet his New York apartment before coming to Boston. Elias's one bedroom was cramped for two grown men, yet neither mentioned separation. It was Layla who offered the practical solution. Mrs. Abernathy in 4C is moving to Florida next month. Two-bedroom with decent rent control. You could both fit a piano in there even. The assumption that they would stay together, that they would rearrange their lives to accommodate this newfound connection, might have seemed presumptuous. Instead, it felt like the most natural progression in the world. "You barely know me," Ethan pointed out when they were alone, though his expression betrayed his hope. "I've known you my entire life," Elias replied. "I just didn't know I knew you." The apartment on Harrison Avenue, where Elias had lived in solitary containment for 6 years, gradually transformed. Ethan's few possessions arrived from New York. A second-hand desk appeared in the corner for composing. The refrigerator, normally stocked with takeout containers and little else, began to fill with actual groceries as they discovered that Ethan had inherited some cooking skills from one of his foster mothers. They established routines around each other with surprising ease. Mornings found them practicing separately. Elias in the bedroom, Ethan in the living room. The disparate sounds of saxophone and violin somehow complementing rather than competing. Afternoons were often spent on practical matters. Ethan applying for local teaching positions and orchestra openings, Elias continuing his regular gigs while exploring new venues. It was during evenings that the true healing began. Sometimes they played together, experimental duets that blended classical precision with jazz improvisation. Other times they simply talked, filling in the 32-year gap with stories, discoveries, shared griefs, and separate joys. "I wish Miriam could have known," Elias said one night. "She would have looked for you. I wish I could have known her." Ethan replied simply. Their mutual history remained a puzzle with missing pieces. The photograph offered no clues about their birth mother beyond her appearance. The identical note suggested she had wanted them both loved, even as circumstances forced her to separate them. "Maybe we should try to find her," Ethan suggested tentatively, 6 weeks after their reunion. The prospect both terrified and compelled Elias. "What if she doesn't want to be found? Then we'll have each other," Ethan said with the simple certainty that had become his hallmark. "That's already more than we had before." The search began with adoption records. Elias's were more accessible thanks to Miriam's legal process. They learned their mother's name, Elena Mirova, a 20-year-old music student from Bulgaria who had come to America on a scholarship. The trail went cold after their birth. She had seemingly disappeared back to Europe. "Mirova?" Ethan repeated thoughtfully. "Mercer. Miriam picked a name that sounded like our birth mother's." "She never told me," Elias said, wondering what other secrets his adoptive mother might have kept to protect him. The search might have stalled there, but for an unexpected connection. The manager at the Blue Note, overhearing their story, mentioned a regular patron, an elderly Bulgarian man who had been coming to jazz nights for decades. Nikolai might know something about musical circles in the Bulgarian community back then, the manager suggested. Nikolai Petrov, white-haired and sharp-eyed at 82, studied the twin brothers with undisguised fascination when they approached him at the club. "Elena Mirova," he repeated, the name triggering visible recognition. "The violinist with golden hands. A violinist, like Ethan. She was brilliant," Nikolai continued, his accent still thick despite 50 years in America. "But very poor, very proud. When she became pregnant, the father abandoned her. Scholarship was canceled. She was desperate. Do you know what happened to her?" Elias asked, his heart pounding so loudly he was sure everyone in the club could hear it. Nikolai's weathered face softened. "She returned to Sofia after having her babies. Died young, perhaps 10 years later. Cancer, I was told." The news landed like a physical blow. Their mother was gone, had been gone for over 20 years. Any hope of reunion, of answers, died in that moment. "Did she ever speak of her children?" Ethan asked, his voice barely audible over the ambient noise of the club. "Always," Nikolai confirmed. "She left you to give you better lives than she could provide. But she never forgot. Every year on your birthday, she played Bach's Chaconne, the piece she was practicing when she learned she was carrying you. The same piece Ethan had played the night they confirmed they were brothers. There is something else," Nikolai added, reaching into his wallet. He extracted a worn business card. "Her younger sister, your aunt, she came looking some years ago. I gave her what information I had about the adoptions. She left this, in case there were ever inquiries." The card bore a name, Lydia Mirova, and a phone number with a Sofia area code. That night, in the quiet of their apartment, The brothers sat with the card between them on the coffee table. It was Ethan who finally reached for the phone, who dialed with trembling fingers while Elias activated the speaker. The connection crackled with distance, the ringing sound seeming to stretch across continents and decades of separation. "Ah!" A woman's voice, cautious and accented. "Lydia Morova?" Ethan asked, his own voice steady despite the emotion Elias could see in his eyes. "Yes, who is calling?" "My name is Ethan Cole. I'm calling with my brother Elias Mercer. We believe you might be our aunt." The silence that followed stretched so long they thought the connection had been lost. Then came a sound, a soft, disbelieving inhale. "Elena's boys," Lydia whispered. After all this time, the conversation that followed lasted hours, filling in the gaps of their history. Elena had been brilliant but impoverished, her pregnancy derailing her promising career. The twins' father, an American music graduate student, had vanished upon learning he would be a father. With no support system in America and medical complications during the pregnancy, Elena had made the heartbreaking choice to place her sons for adoption, hoping they would find security she couldn't provide. "She intended to reclaim you once she was established," Lydia explained, her English careful but fluent. "But life did not cooperate. The illness came quickly, without warning. Did she ever look for us?" Elias asked, the question that had haunted him since childhood, finally finding voice. "Every year," Lydia confirmed. "She saved every penny for investigators, but the American adoption system, it is designed to prevent such searches. By the time I had resources to help, Elena was gone. I continued looking, but all trails went cold. Until now. I have letters," Lydia told them. "Many letters Elena wrote to you both, never sent because she had no address. And photographs. Her violin still in our family home. These things belong to you now." The promise of these connections to their mother, tangible pieces of the woman who had birthed them and loved them enough to let them go, brought tears Elias hadn't shed since Miriam's funeral. "Would you consider visiting Sofia?" Lydia asked hesitantly. "There is family here who have waited a lifetime to meet Elena's sons." Family. The word expanded to include not just the brother Elias had so unexpectedly found, but an entire network of relatives he had never known existed. "Yes," Ethan answered for them both. "We'll come." The months that followed brought changes neither brother could have imagined when Elias first stopped to help an injured stranger in the rain. They moved into Mrs. Abernathy's two-bedroom apartment, creating a home together filled with music and newfound purpose. Ethan secured a position teaching violin at a community music school, while Elias found his performances taking on new depth, his saxophone speaking with an emotional resonance that drew increasingly appreciative audiences. Together, they composed a piece they called Reunion, a duet that wove classical structure with jazz improvisation, telling through music the story they were still learning to tell with words. "We should record it," Ethan suggested as autumn turned the Boston Common to golden crimson. "Take it with us to Sofia." The trip to Bulgaria was planned for the following spring, a pilgrimage to discover their roots and meet the family that had been searching for them as persistently as they had been feeling the absence of connection. On the anniversary of the night they found each other, the night an orphaned musician helped an injured stranger, unknowingly saving the life of his long-lost twin, they performed Reunion, publicly for the first time at the Blue Note. Nikolai sat in the front row, his eyes bright with unshed tears, as saxophone and violin spoke to each other across the stage, across time. "I think," Ethan said later that night as they walked home through gentle rain, so unlike the downpour that had first brought them together, "that we were always heading toward each other, every choice, every turn, leading to that doorway on Harrison Avenue." Elias considered this, the cosmic orchestration that seemed too perfect to be coincidence. "Do you think she knows, Elena, that we found each other?" Ethan smiled, the expression so like Elias's own that it still startled him sometimes to see it on another face. "I think she made sure of it." Above them, the clouds parted briefly, revealing a scatter of stars across the city sky. Two brothers walked in step beneath them, no longer alone, no longer incomplete. Two halves of a melody finally played in harmony. In Sofia, a violin that had once belonged to a young mother lay waiting for her sons to return it to life. In Boston, that same mother's legacy continued through the music her sons created together, a testament to the love that had led her to the hardest choice imaginable and to the miracle that had brought them full circle. An orphaned musician had helped an injured stranger, unknowingly saving the life of his long-lost twin. And in doing so, he had also saved himself.